The house that never slept. For 12 years, the lights in the Halifax home on Bramble Street never went out. Not because the people inside stayed awake, but because Mark Halston wanted it that way. A lit house meant control. A lit house meant eyes everywhere, shadows nowhere. And for his wife, Lena, it meant no safe corner to hide in, no dark room to breathe, no space where she wasn't being watched, sensed, measured. Every night, Mark paced. Every night, Lena braced. To the outside world, Mark was a mild-mannered contractor who donated to the church, mowed his lawn twice a week, and waved at neighbors with a smile. But behind their walls, he became something else entirely, a man who sought power in the quietest, most devastating ways. He didn't hit. He didn't scream. His methods were worse. He whispered rules. He monitored her phone. He questioned her every move, quietly, politely, relentlessly. He held her by the wrist when she tried to walk away, gripping just enough to remind her she belonged to him. And every night, as the clock neared 2 a.m., he would come to the bedroom door, and Lena would freeze. "Where are you going?" she would whisper, though she already knew. Mark would smile. He always smiled when he hurt her. But tonight was different. Tonight, Mark walked into the bedroom, humming the same off-key tune he hummed every night, and Lena felt something inside her shift, something quiet and terrifying and solid. She wasn't afraid. Not because he had changed, but because she had. Tonight, she had a plan. And tonight, Mark had no idea that the power he held so carefully was already slipping through his fingers. The day before it began, it had started with a simple moment, a quiet moment, a moment that would mean nothing to anyone else. Lena had been in the grocery store picking apples when she saw a woman drop a bag of rice. It burst, scattering everywhere. The woman froze, embarrassed. And Lena watched a stranger kneel beside her, wordlessly helping her gather each grain. That simple kindness felt sharper than any knife, because Lena couldn't remember the last time someone had been gentle with her. She had gone home, sat in her locked bathroom, and whispered something she hadn't said in years. "I deserve better." She recorded it on her phone. Not to listen to remember. That was the first step. The second step came by accident. A man named Daniel Alvarez moved into the vacant house next door. Young, quiet, worked odd hours. Someone who carried himself like he'd seen darkness, but didn't let it consume him. And he noticed things. Not loudly, not intrusively, but in a way that made Lena nervous and hopeful. He noticed that Lena only left the house at certain hours. He noticed Mark checking the mailbox before she could. He noticed the cameras Mark had hidden around the yard. One morning, as Lena stepped outside to take the trash, Daniel stood by his driveway with a cup of coffee and said quietly, "Are you okay?" She froze. No one had asked her that in years. Before she could answer, she heard Mark's footsteps behind her, measured, heavy, trained to appear casual. Daniel glanced up, read the situation instantly, and gave a small nod as if to say, "I see you. I'm here. Be careful." That was the second step. The third step was the ring. The ring wasn't valuable, just a delicate silver band with a blue stone, something Lena had bought for herself when she was 19, before Mark, before the house, before the constant fear. She had hidden it years ago, too scared to wear something that reminded her she once belonged to herself. But last night, she dug it out of the shoebox behind the old coats in the attic. She slid it onto her finger, and something inside her clicked. She wasn't his. Not anymore. The night she snapped. Mark walked into the room humming. Same tune, same rhythm, same control. But he didn't notice the ring. He didn't notice the shift in Lena's eyes. He didn't notice her pulse had steadied. He didn't notice she wasn't shrinking. He didn't notice she wasn't whispering. He didn't notice her watching him, not with fear, but with calculation. "You moved my tools," he said softly, like a teacher scolding a child. "No," Lena said. One word. Calm. Sharp. Clean. Mark stopped humming. "What did you say?" "I said no." Even the walls went silent. For the first time in 12 years, Lena wasn't trembling. Mark smiled, but this time, his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Lena," he murmured, stepping closer, "you know the rules." She stepped back, not in fear, but in preparation. Not anymore. Mark's smile faded, and for the first time, he felt afraid. He didn't understand why. He didn't know what had changed. He didn't know she had a plan. But he felt the shift like a cold wind under the door. "Go to bed," he said. "No." 2 letters. 12 years of silence breaking open. And that was the moment Lena snapped. Not violently, but strategically, coldly, brilliantly. Not the snap of chaos, the snap of awakening. She looked him dead in the eyes and whispered, "I'm done playing your game." Mark's expression shifted from annoyance to confusion to anger to something he had never felt around her before. Powerlessness. He took a step toward her, and then something deep inside the house clicked. Not a sound, a feeling, as if the walls themselves knew, this is the night everything changes. Mark didn't sleep that night, not because he wasn't tired he was, but because something in the air had changed, and he felt it like pressure behind his eyes. For 12 years, the rhythm of their marriage had been predictable. He controlled, she obeyed, the house stayed quiet. But tonight, Lena's no echoed through the dark like a crack in foundation stone. She had never defied him, not once, not even in small ways. So Mark lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment in his mind again and again, her voice, her tone, the steadiness in her eyes. It wasn't fear, it wasn't desperation, it was intention. And Mark didn't like what intention meant. Lena didn't sleep either, but for a different reason. She sat in the living room long after Mark had gone upstairs, watching the shadows move across the hardwood floor. This was the moment she had prepared for. This was the night everything started. Yet her hands were steady, her breathing calm. She had spent years shrinking herself, bending her voice into softness, folding her thoughts into corners where Mark couldn't reach. But tonight she felt like unfolding. The first step of her plan began at exactly 3:12 a.m., a time she knew Mark would be listening. She walked upstairs slowly, deliberately letting each step creak, not sneaking, announcing. She stopped at the bedroom door. Mark was pretending to be asleep. She could always tell by the way he held his breath. "I'm going for a walk," Lena said softly, a simple sentence, but the power of it shook the room. She had never left the house without permission, never at night, never unobserved. Mark sat up immediately. "Absolutely not." She didn't move. "I wasn't asking." The silence between them tightened, coiling like wire. Mark swung his legs out of bed. "Where are you going?" Lena looked him dead in the eyes. "Outside." Two syllables, brimming with calm defiance. He opened his mouth to argue, but something in her gaze stopped him. Not fear, not rebellion. Control. A kind he didn't recognize. He followed her downstairs, demanding answers. She didn't give him any. She stepped out the front door, closed it behind her, and walked into the cold night. For the first time in years, she felt air touch her freely. The neighbor saw everything. Daniel had been in his garage working on an old motorcycle when he heard voices next door. Raised voices. Unusual for that house. He peeked through the open garage door and froze when he saw Lena step outside. Alone, head high, back straight. Her husband stood at the doorway, watching her like a warden. Daniel switched off the light and waited. He didn't want to intrude, but he also didn't want her walking the streets alone at night. After a moment, he walked out casually, hands in his pockets. "Everything okay?" he asked gently. Lena didn't answer at first. She didn't have to. The look in her eyes told him, no. But soon it will be. "Just getting some air," she finally said. Mark's voice sliced through the night. "She's fine. Go back inside." Daniel didn't move. Lena did. She stepped slightly closer to Daniel, just enough for Mark to see she had made a choice. Her first choice in years. Daniel swallowed, reading the situation instantly. "All right," he said. "But if you need anything." "I know," she said softly. Mark hated that exchange. He hated the way she stood. He hated the way she sounded. She sounded alive. The first move. Lena returned inside on her own time. Mark slammed the door behind her. "What was that?" he hissed. She removed her jacket calmly. "A walk. You don't walk at night. I do now." Mark stared at her like she'd grown new skin. "You're acting strange." "Strange for who?" Mark stepped closer, lowering his voice to that terrible softness he used when he wanted control. "What's going on with you?" Lena's answer was simple. "I'm tired." "Tired of what?" he pressed. "You." Mark's jaw tightened. There it was, the first truth. But Lena wasn't finished. "I'm tired of the rules, the monitoring, the questions, the pace of your footsteps behind me. Everything." Mark blinked, stunned. She had never spoken to him this way, never expressed anything more than compliance. "You're not leaving," he said quietly. "I didn't say I was." He exhaled in relief. "But you're losing me," she finished. And that hit him harder than any threat, because Mark didn't care about love. He cared about ownership. Something cold curled behind his eyes. "I'm going to fix this," he said. Lena shook her head. You can't. She walked past him, climbed the stairs, and went to bed, leaving him standing in the hallway unsure of what had just happened. Mark checked the cameras. At 4 a.m., he sat in front of his security monitors, scrolling through footage. He watched her leave. He watched her stand near Daniel. He watched her speak to him. He rewound it 3 times. A sick twist tightened in his chest. Daniel was the variable, the threat, the contamination. If Lena was slipping from his grasp, someone must be pulling her away. And Mark convinced himself he knew exactly who. Lena knew he'd checked the cameras. That's why she stepped closer to Daniel. It was a test. She needed to know Mark's reaction. She needed to know how closely he watched her. She needed to know how quickly jealousy and paranoia would surface, because paranoia was the first crack she could use. That was her real walk, not outside her house, inside his mind. The secret she found in the attic. At sunrise, when the house was finally quiet and Mark had drifted into troubled sleep, Lena crept into the attic. There, in the dim corners behind old sewing supplies and forgotten boxes, she found it. A small wooden chest, locked, heavy, unlabeled. Mark's handwriting on a strip of masking tape read, "Do not open." Her pulse ticked faster. The key wasn't anywhere in sight. She touched the lid gently. This wasn't just storage. This was something he feared she'd ever see. And for the first time since their wedding day, Lena smiled. Not a soft smile, a sharp one, because whatever Mark hid was going to help destroy him. The box he feared. The attic was colder than the rest of the house. Lena had always noticed that. Even in summer, it held on to the chill. Mark claimed it was poor insulation, but Lena now understood it was something else entirely. Secrets keep their own temperature. Standing in the half-dark, she ran her fingers along the wooden chest. Her husband had taped those words, "Do not open," onto it like a warning, or a threat, or maybe a confession that never found its voice. She tried the lid again. Locked, stubborn, good. A locked box meant fear. Fear meant leverage, and leverage was the one thing she'd never had. Footsteps below. A floorboard creaked downstairs. Not loud, soft, measured. Mark was awake. Lena froze, placing her fingers lightly on the box as if it were evidence, because it was. She listened carefully. Another step, a breath, silence. He was checking the house. He always did when he felt things slipping. He'd walk room to room, touching surfaces, straightening frames, convincing himself everything was still under his control. She waited until his footsteps drifted toward the kitchen before slipping back down the attic ladder. By the time she reached the hallway, Mark was pouring himself coffee, pretending he hadn't been pacing like a hunted animal. "Morning," he said, too casually. Too casually. "Morning." He watched her move around the kitchen, watched the way she didn't avoid his eyes, didn't shrink, didn't rush. It unsettled him more than any argument could. "You're up early," he said. "I needed something from the attic." Mark's hand froze on the mug handle. "What?" he asked too quickly. Lena shrugged. "Just a box of old photos." She didn't blink as she lied. Mark did. He set the mug down slowly, trying to hide the tremor in his fingers. "What box?" "Does it matter?" she asked, reaching for a plate. His jaw twitched. "It matters," she thought. "You're telling me it matters without realizing you're telling me." Mark forced a smile. "If you see anything old or fragile, just let me know. I'll handle it." "Handle what?" she asked softly. He blinked, confused, cornered, unbalanced. Just things, stored things." But his voice cracked, and Lena filed that away like a weapon. "The neighbor interrupts a knock," came at the door. Mark stiffened. Lena wiped her hands, deliberately walking past him to answer it. Daniel stood on the porch holding a toolbox. "Sorry to bother you. My garage heater blew a fuse. Thought you might have a spare." Mark appeared behind Lena like a shadow. "We don't," he snapped. Daniel's eyes flicked to Lena. "You mind if I check? Could save you a trip into town later." Mark opened his mouth to refuse again, but Lena beat him to it. "Go ahead," she said, stepping aside. Mark's head snapped toward her in disbelief. "You don't need." "It's fine," she cut in. Daniel stepped inside, quiet but observant. He noticed everything. The tense air, Mark's rigid posture, Lena's uncharacteristic calm. "Fuse box is in the basement, right?" Daniel asked. "Yes," Mark said sharply. "I'll show you." But Lena touched Daniel's shoulder lightly, barely a brush. "I'll take him." Mark froze. It was the smallest gesture, but in a marriage built on control, small gestures could be grenades. In the basement, the moment they were out of earshot, Daniel spoke softly. You okay? Lena nodded once. Better than I've been in years. Daniel studied her carefully. You're planning something. It wasn't a question. Lena didn't deny it. Do you still hear things at night? She asked. Daniel hesitated. Yes. What did you hear yesterday? He looked at her for a long moment before answering. Fear, he said quietly. Yours. She swallowed hard, then forced herself back to the present. Thank you for knocking this morning. Daniel nodded. Wanted to check if you needed help. I might, Lena said. Soon. Daniel didn't push, didn't pry, didn't ask questions she couldn't answer yet. He simply said, whenever you're ready. She handed him a fuse from the toolbox and whispered, There's something in the attic he doesn't want me to see. Daniel went still. That means you should see it. Mark's paranoia begins. When Daniel left, Mark practically slammed the door behind him. What was that? He demanded. Lena gave him a blank look. Helping a neighbor? Mark stepped closer. Don't play games with me. She lifted her chin. I'm not the one playing. His face darkened, and then, quietly, almost thoughtfully, he said, You're different. I don't like it. You don't have to, she replied. Mark grabbed her wrist, not hard, but firmly, reflexively. Lena didn't flinch. You're losing control, she said softly. He dropped her wrist as if burned. I'm not. You are. Mark backed away, shaken, and then something inside him snapped. Not loudly, but with that soft, dangerous crack of a tree splitting before it falls. I'm checking the attic, he announced suddenly. Lena's heart kicked. Perfect. Be my guest, she said. He pushed past her, climbing the stairs with increasing urgency. She waited at the bottom step, calm, silent. Upstairs, he rummaged through boxes, muttering under his breath, searching for something, searching for the wooden chest, searching for a secret that suddenly felt exposed. Lena didn't need to follow him. She could already tell from the crashing sounds he couldn't find the box, because she hadn't just checked it, she had moved it. Hidden it. Written down every detail on the lid before she locked it again. And now Mark was tearing the attic apart, panicking, unraveling. Exactly as she hoped he would. When he finally came down, his shirt was dusty, hair disheveled, eyes wild, the perfect picture of a man losing the narrative he'd written for 12 years. What did you do? He demanded. Lena looked him dead in the eyes. Nothing, she said. He grabbed her shoulders. Where is it? Where is what? She whispered. Mark stared at her as if seeing her for the first time, not as property, not as a quiet shadow in his house, but as something far more dangerous, an opponent. He stepped back slowly. You're going to tell me, he said in a low voice. Eventually. Lena smiled, a small, cold, victorious smile. I don't think I will. What he didn't know tonight he would sleep. Tomorrow he would unravel further, and soon. The secret inside that box, whatever it was, would become the centerpiece of his downfall. But for now, Lena walked past him unbothered and whispered the 6 words that made his blood run cold. You should be afraid, Mark. I'm not the same woman anymore. And she wasn't. She was becoming someone new, someone he should never have created. Chash, end of part 3. Approx 1,250 words. Say part 4 and I'll continue with the revelation of what's inside the box, Mark's paranoia escalating into obsession, Lena's psychological traps, Daniel getting drawn deeper, and the next phase of Lena's revenge plan unfolding in the dark.